Okay, so in this video, I'm going to start to break down this personal project I did a little ways back. Just this kind of molecule, kind of interesting little thing with some nice random movement. And I'm going to walk you through the modeling, lighting materials, as well as the animation. And then in my next video, I'll actually break down the compositing and show you guys how I set this up in After Effects. Here is the project itself. Okay, nice little molecule. Kind of a weird, kind of sci-fi abstract kind of cage around it that's also moving. Some nice depth of field, volumetric effects, and then lots of compositing going on. So that's what we're going to be doing. Let's go ahead and get started in Cinema 4D. Just to speed things up a little bit, I have all of the spheres created for us, and these are just primitive, just kind of positioned in a interesting way. What I'm going to do is take a volume builder and drop all these spheres inside of it. Okay. And with this volume builder, we need to turn down the voxel size, really just giving us some more detail, some more resolution, if you will. So value of 3 will work pretty good. You may be noticing I'm seeing the individual kind of edges or polygons that make up these spheres. Since they are primitives, if I select a primitive in my object list here in my volume builder, I have this perfect primitive option, which will smooth this out for me. And it means I don't have to go through and increase the segments on all of them. So here we go. This is looking a little bit better. I think what I want to do though is kind of smooth out the intersections of where the cube or the spheres meet. And I'm going to do that by using a smooth. So I'll take that, place it on top, and that's maybe a bit too much. So I can lower the strength a little bit here to maybe like 50% or so. Now this isn't geometry yet. So what I want to do is put this in a volume mesher and then drop the volume builder inside. And this is what we end up with. So this is looking pretty good. But what I'm going to do now is actually duplicate these spheres and hide the volume mesher because what we're going to do is use a vertex tag to create some selections using fields to help us vary the color on this. And if that sounds a little bit confusing, it's really not too difficult. So with these spheres, what I'm going to do is take a spherical field and make it a child of each one. Right, so something like this. And just select all of them, go to the coordinate tab and center them. So just zeroing out the position properties will center our spherical field around each of our spheres. We actually don't need one around kind of the base or middle sphere there. So with that in mind, what we're going to do now is convert our volume mesher to a polygon object. And so I can just right click and make editable, or what I'm going to do is just current state to object so that I still have my original for later on. And what we need to do is create that vertex tag. So I'm going to select any point, come up here to select and choose set vertex weight. And I'm going to make sure the value here is set to 0 so it doesn't set anything for us. And now we have our vertex tag here, a vertex map. And with that, what I'm going to do is take all these spherical fields out of the spheres and get rid of them so we don't see them. Okay. And now we need to add these spherical fields to the vertex map so they can influence the map. We need to check use fields. What I'll do is lock my attribute manager so it doesn't change from here, making it a little bit easier to drop these in. Okay, freeze at the bottom. Really don't need that. And you'll notice we're only seeing one spherical field here, changing the way our vertex map works. And the way these values show is that red means 0% influence, yellow means 100% influence. And if we want all of these to show, we need to switch the blending modes on the top 3 to max. That will let the other spherical fields come through. Now we can see them. And now we can adjust the spherical fields because I don't want them to kind of overlap. And I just want that yellowish color to be kind of just around the end there, not too far on the main kind of sphere there. So I can pull this one, say, down a little bit. Okay. Maybe move on to this one. I can always scale these as well, which can help. All right, so maybe something like that for that particular one. This one, the same type of thing, scale it up or down. Another thing we can do to help with the way these values are being kind of added here and how hard-edged or smooth they are is in the spherical field. Let me unlock my attribute manager now. In the spherical field, go to the remapping tab and change that inner offset. Okay, so that's going to change how smooth or hard that transition is. So I think something like that might be just a little bit too much. But there we go, liking that. And then this little guy is just way too big. So I think maybe something like this will work. And honestly, let's go back to this one. Maybe move it a little bit down so we get a little bit of some space there. And then, yeah, I think this guy can be just a little bit smaller there. There we go. Perfect. So that's looking good. Okay. Have our vertex tag. We have our spherical fields. Honestly, we can just kind of put these in a null, hide them in case we ever want to make changes. Okay, and now we have our molecule. So let's go ahead and name that. And we're going to use the molecule now to make the kind of metallic cage we had around these. So I'm going to duplicate this, rename it cage. And the way I'm going to start is by using a polygon reduction. Take my cage, put it in the polygon reduction, hide my molecule so we can just see our cage object here. And I'm going to want to see my lines for this because really what we're trying to do is reduce the number of polygons. And even if we take this reduction strength up to 99%, it isn't quite enough. So what I'll do is current state to object, and we're just going to kind of repeat this process. Take our cage again, drop it in another polygon reduction so we can get this even lower now. Now the way we're going to create the cage is by using an atom array. So I can take the atom array, make sure the polygon reduction is inside of that. We can bring back our molecule now, and you'll see, they're the same size. So we're actually going to take our cage and just scale it up a little bit until we get something that's a little bit bigger. And we do want to keep an eye out for any kind of intersections. We want to avoid those. We can either fix those by scaling or by going into our low poly mesh here and just pulling the points we need kind of further out as well. All right. So I'm not too concerned about that for this, but that is definitely something you want to keep an eye on. It actually looks like it's worked out pretty well so far, maybe with the exception being right here. So, all right, that looks pretty good. Now, I do want to get rid of these spheres and just kind of leave the cylinders there. So in the atom array, what we can do is just set the sphere radius to the same as the cylinder radius. And that will essentially make those disappear. You can kind of just see them a little bit, but when you turn off the lines, they're not really visible at all. And that's really it for the modeling of the actual molecule. The next step is to take both of these, and I may actually just tweak this a little bit more. I'm going to actually make my polygon reduction editable again so it doesn't keep calculating and slowing me down because I'm about to put this into a cloner. And I want to make sure inside the cloner everything is simple as possible. So I grouped everything, the molecule and the atom array, which might as well call cage. And I'm going to take this and drop it into a cloner. I am holding Alt or Option so that that group becomes a child of the cloner. And then here, I'm going to use the grid array mode. I just want a bunch of them. So I'm going to go like maybe 8 by 4 by 8. Seems like quite a bit. And really for this, I may want to switch the instance mode to render instance to help things speed up, just to make my life a little bit easier. Now I'm going to space these out. So let's do like 1200 maybe by 800 by 1200 again, or 1300. Okay, and I can always come back in and adjust the number, because I do feel like I might have a few too many here. It shouldn't be the end of the world. Maybe something like this. And now to help kind of make this more interesting, I am going to add a random effector here. So I'm going to select the cloner, go to my MoGraph objects and choose random. And this one's going to be for the position, scale, and rotation. So once I've named that, I'll go into the parameter tab and say, all right, maybe 1000 on each axis. Hopefully that gives me something, a little bit more kind of equally randomly distributed. Get rid of that kind of grid pattern. And check on scale and uniform scale. We'll set this to 0.5 to get them a little bit larger and smaller. And then with rotation, really, 180, 360 in each ought to give us some nice variation there. So now we just have this kind of collection of random molecules. And I'm going to try and find one to kind of zero in on, make my hero molecule. And I may want to push these out a little bit on, say, the x-axis, just so I can kind of find one. And this guy, let's see, which one? Yeah, I think this one will work pretty good. So with that, I'm also going to create a camera. And since we'll eventually be using Redshift, I'm going to create a Redshift camera. So there we go. I'll add a protection tag. So can't move the camera. What do you know? Looks like I still have some intersection there. Not the end of the world. Now I'll move onto the animation. So I'm going to start with my cloner again. And I'm going to add another random effector. This one will be random animation. And I'm going to want a little bit of movement on each axis. So why don't we start with 100? Can always increase that. I don't want to have the scale animated, but I do want to have some animation on the rotation. So maybe 30 degrees on it. To actually get the animation, I'm going to go to the effector tab. I'm going to switch the random mode here to noise. And now if I hit play, you'll see I have some movement. Okay, it's a bit too fast for me, so I'll reduce the speed to maybe say 25%. Still maybe a bit too fast, so let's do 15. 7. So that looks pretty good. And overall, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. It's a little bit kind of jittery, maybe not quite as natural as I would like. Maybe increasing the rotations a little bit would give this a little bit more of kind of tumbling. Another thing I could try would be to come in here to the effector and to increase the scale here a little bit. That seems to have worked a little bit. All right, so the overall animation is done. But now what we're going to do is add just a little bit more animation to the molecules themselves. So in my cloner, I'm going to have my molecule here. And what I'm going to add to this is a displacer. So there's my displacer. Add that deformer to the molecule. And I'm going to add a noise to this. And that's going to end up looking something like this. And I could turn down the strength a little bit because once again, I'm trying to keep an eye on that intersection. In the noise, we could experiment with different noises, different noise types we have to see if we can get something we like a little bit more. I'm not terribly concerned at this point if it's looking a little jagged or if I'm getting any Phong issues, because I'll either use a subdivision surface or a Redshift object tag to subdivide this geometry and smooth it out a little bit. All right, so to actually get this animating, I'm going to find the animation speed property in my noise shader and just maybe set that to something like 2. And that's looking maybe a bit too fast. Let's try 1. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so that's working out pretty well. And I'm going to do something very similar with the cage as well. And I'm going to make the displacer a child of the cage geometry, not the atom array there. And we can see it's moving a little bit. And with this, I may want to increase the strength back to say 100% to get a little more movement. In the noise, I may want to make the scale just say a bit larger. Maybe slow down the animation a little bit. There we go. And might even push this a little bit more by increasing the height to say 15. And if I'm getting a little bit more intersection, I can always come back in and just scale up the cage just a little bit more. I still have a bit, but I think we'll be fine. Okay, so that's it for the animation. Now what we're going to do is move on to the materials and lighting. So we're actually going to start with the lighting here. So I'm actually going to get out of my camera for this. And I'm actually going to switch to my normal layout here, which does have my Redshift render view and material editor or node editor all pulled up. And the first light I'm going to create is a spotlight. And to make this spotlight a little bit easier to work with, I'm going to create a null, kind of place this towards my camera, my hero molecule, move this up. Doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's in the general direction. And I'm going to use the target tag to turn this essentially into a target light. Okay. Now I'm going to move this light up. This isn't going to be our main light source. We're actually going to be using this to get some volumetric effects. So that looks like a good place to start. I'm going to switch back to my camera so I can render this and see what we have. And I wouldn't expect to see anything because our light is too far away, too small. So I can increase the exposure. We're going to start to see the lighting come through here. And so I think that looks pretty good. I may also want to go into the spotlight and just increase the cone angle a little bit, make sure we get more of these molecules. All right, you can see as I do that, we get more and more. I don't want to go too crazy, although, 100 degrees is pretty wide. So that's looking pretty good. We got some nice contrast and variation with the lighting. And it's about at this point, we can add our dome light as well, just for the remainder of our illumination. And I have a HDRI. So that looks pretty good. It's maybe a bit bright, but I'm going to hold off on making any adjustments right now until I get the volume in there, or the environment in there. So I'm going to turn off the dome light, focus just with the spotlight, since that's what will be creating the volumetric effects from our environment. And to create that, I'm going to go to Redshift, Objects, Environment. Now for the environment to actually do anything, I need to have a light contribute to it. So I'm going to select the spotlight, go to my volume tab, and I can start to increase my contribution scale. And you can see immediately as I do that, things really start to blow out. We lose a lot of the other molecules behind it. And so I can kind of get this to a point where we're starting to get some volume in there from this. And I'm ending up using a really low value here. I could turn this up and then do more adjustment with my attenuation or scattering. But, honestly, just working with the contribution scale is good enough for me in this particular project. So I'm trying to get some contrast in here with this volumetric kind of look. So something like that looks pretty good to me. And the position of the spotlight is really what's causing that look. So if I want to change kind of the angle or height of my light, hopefully it's coming through, how that's affecting what the volume is doing. So I'm pretty happy with that. I can add in my dome light to see what we get. Now, all of our volumetric stuff, the majority of it is gone. So what I'm going to do is turn down our light here so we can get a little bit of that back. And we could always come into our dome light and just uncheck enable background. And that will get rid of the HDRI there and allow us to kind of see what we get without that. So I think that's looking pretty good. These are actually still a little bit too bright. So that's probably going to be in the volume here. May want to turn this up, come here to my environment, and then adjust my attenuation a little bit. And that's kind of looking a little bit nicer. Can find a good kind of happy medium. I like that we can kind of see where the light's coming from. And now I might be able to go back to my dome light and increase its brightness just a little bit more so we can see these. Great. So that's looking pretty good. While I'm here, might as well also get the depth of field in there. So I'm going to go to bokeh. I'm going to override and enable. And I personally like to do everything in the redshift settings here as opposed to the settings in my camera. So I'll click to focus. And honestly, that looks pretty good. Maybe we can increase the circle of confusion radius just a little bit more to something like that. So that's looking pretty good. Although I'm not a huge fan of this guy down here. May try and find a way to get rid of him at some point. Okay, so the materials, rather than make them from scratch, I figured I would just kind of show you guys what I did, break them down for you. The metal, very easy, very straightforward. It's really just a preset. Both of these are just using the regular redshift material, by the way, but it's just the aluminum preset with some increased roughness. And so that goes on the cage. Now for the molecule, this one's a little bit more complicated, and why don't we add it to the molecule so we can see what it looks like now, but also break down how I got there. It starts with the vertex attribute. This is using that vertex map we created with the spherical fields that allows us to tell this material where we want different colors. It could also be used to control the strength of different properties, but all you do is create the vertex attribute node, drag your vertex map into it, and I am using that in the color mix, which is being piped into my refraction and transmission color. And so the color mix node looks like this. All right, so hopefully that looks similar to what we are doing with the spherical fields earlier. And as I mentioned, it's actually piped into the refraction and transmission color. In terms of the base properties, not a whole lot going on with the diffuse. With the reflection, just added decent amount of roughness. There is a little bit of a coating on here to just add some depth to the reflectivity. And then in the refraction and transmission, as I mentioned, the weight has been increased to 1, and the color mix is driving the refraction and transmission color. There's just a little bit, barely, of subsurface scattering. So these both scale properties here, absorption and scatter scale, super finicky when it comes to the scale of the objects you're working with, and then the values you will want to use down here. So definitely be careful with that. And then lastly, I have this Fresnel plugged into the overall emission. And if you've never used a Fresnel shader before, it's what kind of gives you kind of the X-ray look where the edges or the outer parts of our objects are brighter and they get darker as it gets towards the middle. And so I'm using that emission to kind of just give this a little bit of that X-ray look while brightening up the sides a little. And that is it for the modeling, lighting materials, animation as well. All that's left to do is the compositing setup as well as the compositing itself, which, as I said, will be in my next video. So to make sure to stay tuned for that.